This morning's sermon is based off of a question that I want to pose to us, and then we will develop the response or the biblical answer to that question. And the question is this: do you get sin, or does sin get you? And we use the word get in the English language in various ways. Sometimes I'll tell a dad joke, and my kids will say, "I don't get it." Well, most of the time, that's what they say. Or maybe a little bit later, they'll say, "Oh, I get it." Or you might say about something, a surprise, or maybe some emotional Hallmark movie or something, you say, "That gets me every time." And so we use that word in different ways, and I'm using it in different ways in this question. Do you get sin? Oh, I get it. Or does sin get you? That gets me maybe every time. And there's a difference. And the way to keep it from getting you is to get it. In other words, to understand it, the way it works. When I was in the military, we used a tool, a device called concertina wire. And it basically was a reinforced slinky, very big, that when stretched out, made a fence around a place that you were trying to protect. And on that concertina wire were razor barbs. And you think of a barbed wire fence, you know about the barbs on there. These weren't those kind of barbs, just poke you. These were razor barbs. And if you got into concertina wire, it would rip if you got in it, you were in it. And it would rip your uniform, it would rip your skin. You didn't want to get tangled up in it. And that was the whole point of using it. It would deter people from trying to enter into a camp or an area that you were trying to protect. But it was funny sometimes and interesting to watch individuals who were experienced with that device and who weren't. And someone who had not been around it would just kind of try to walk through it, and before you know it, they're stuck, and their uniform's getting ripped, and they're having trouble getting out of it. But if you had been around it a while, and if you noticed that it had been stretched out a little bit more than it was designed to be stretched out, then you could walk up to it, you could step in the joint of it and hold the sides back to keep them from folding in on you, and you could walk right through it. You had to get it in order to do that. But if you didn't get it, then it would get you every time. When I think about the way sin works, that's what I think of. Maybe just from that unique military experience, but it's very similar. If you don't get it, then it will get you, and it will get you every time. I want us to spend our time this morning thinking about the difference between getting it and it getting us. I want to talk about James chapter 1, verses 14 through 15, because that's essentially what that passage is about. We have God laying out before us how sin works. In essence, he's telling us how to step through or over or maybe go around or just avoid the concertina wire so that we don't get caught up in it. And so I want to look at that. I want to look at James 1, 14 through 15 especially. And then I want to put before us what it looks like when sin gets you. There are a whole host of examples in the Bible of that, where sin got people because they didn't get it. And then thirdly, this morning, what does it look like when you get sin? When you understand it, What went into your mind's process to get you to the point where you could see it, you could recognize it, and you could deal with it much better than a novice would? Someone who wasn't really paying attention to the danger and the threat of sin. I don't intend to spend a lot of time talking about what sin is this morning. We've done that on previous occasions. But 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4 says sin is transgression of God's law. Sin is something you do. It's not something you inherit. It's not something that we should ignore because, after all, we can't do anything about it. The Bible teaches just the opposite. It's interesting in the religious world that so many teach that by our very nature we are going to sin. We've inherited that and we can't do anything about it. It's interesting that many take that idea of philosophy and then you turn to the Bible, and so much of the Bible is about our responsibility and duty not to sin. I'd rather go with the Bible and expect that God expects us to do something about it and not just adopt some mindset or some religious belief that says, well, you know, it's just inherited, that's in my nature, and I really can't do anything about it. Because if that's what you think, that's what you will do. Nothing. And Romans chapter 6, beginning at verse 1, asks the question, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? And Paul said, God forbid. How shall we who are dead to sin continue any longer therein? So sin is something we're to avoid. How do we do that? Well, I think this lesson from James 1 will be very helpful to us. Do you get sin, or does sin get you? Let's develop that passage. Listen to it again. We've heard it once. Let's hear it again. Let no one say when I'm tempted, or when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. First, in verse 13, we learn that God is not the source of temptation. Now, there's a difference between testing or trials and then God tempting us to do wrong. James points out very clearly that God is not the source of temptation because he cannot be tempted, nor does he tempt any man. God's nature is perfect without sin, and it would require a nature that was subject to sin to entice people to sin. So this is not from God. He's not the source of temptation. God can't be tempted, and he doesn't tempt any man to sin. Verse 14, James tells us how it happens. Each man, each of us, this is individual. You are responsible for you. I'm responsible for me. That's Ezekiel 18. Each of us, in our own way, because of the devil's knowledge of our weaknesses, our desires, each of us is tempted when? We're lured away. It's literally fishing language here. I mean, think of a fisherman enticing a fish with a lure. And in order for that fish to be enticed, whatever kind of fish it is, he has to leave his place of safety to go to that lure. He's drawn away from the place of safety. That fish instinctively makes that move. You and I consciously make that move away from the place of safety to where that enticement is for us. So we're drawn away or lured away by our own desires. Satan is not ignorant. He knows what our desires are, and he can use those to exploit our weaknesses, to draw us out. And so we're tempted when we're lured away by our own desires and enticed. And then verse 15, when desire conceives, same language as the conception process of bringing forth a child into the world. When desire conceives, it comes to full term. So when this conception of the enticement and the desire comes together, it will birth something to full term. And what is that that's birthed to full term? Death. Because the wages of sin is death, Romans 6:23. And Paul said in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, for as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death is passed upon all men. Listen now, for all have sinned. Not because Adam sinned, but because all have sinned. Each of us is drawn away, lured away by an enticement that is aimed at our desires. And then when that conception takes place, our desire turns into will based upon that enticement. It brings forth sin. And the consequences of sin is death. Very simply stated, temptation presents consistent with our desires, which meets this enticement, and guess what? It gets you. Because you, or I, for that matter, didn't really get it. If that fish had the knowledge and the wisdom and the ability to know that underneath that pretty, shiny, sparkly, glittery lure was a hook that had a barb on the end of it, that when it met his lip, it would pierce his lip and it would catch him and it would hold on to him. If he could discern that, he wouldn't bite. I've fished on occasions where I thought somebody had shared that information with the fish. It may have just been that I didn't know how to entice and snare them. But Satan is a great fisherman. He's got a tackle box that's full of lures. And there are probably this morning several in there with your name on them, my name on them, because he knows what he needs to do and what influence he needs to wield in order to entice us. And he exploits our desires. Desires in and of themselves are not wrong. But this process that takes place that entices us to go beyond what might be a natural, innocent desire into an arena where we have left God to get there, he exploits that and he gets us. And that's what James is showing us here. God didn't do this. You did it to yourself. And I did it to myself. For one of two reasons. Either I get it and I don't care. And I hope that's not the case with any of us this morning. Or we don't get it. Or at least we don't get it as well as we should. And I'm hopeful that this latter reason is the one that represents our problem with Satan, because we can work with that. We can't work with the other. If you get it and you don't care, nobody can help that. It's just like the evidence seminar yesterday. If you put all the evidence before someone and they get it, but they don't care, what are you going to do beyond that to help them? And so if God puts before us this process and he explains it so well in James, and we get it, but we don't care, then what is left to help us. But if you look at that this morning, you say, yeah, that's how it happens. That seems to be right. I see that. I get it. Let's notice now some people who either didn't get it at the moment or they didn't get it well enough to avoid the situation. What does it look like? Number two, what does it look like when sin gets you? And I want to give several examples. We're not going to take time to turn to all of these. These will all, I'm sure, be familiar to you. And maybe even when I mention it, you'll say, oh yeah, that's definitely a good example of what we're talking about. But I'll give you the verses and you can go look at them and you can see this process in each of these. How James 1 verses 14 through 15 is essentially a template that you could just lay over each of these and see. Yep, that's the point where he should have gotten it and he didn't. And that's kind of what happens to me. When Satan comes at me, I look just like that person or this person. Or how it played out in their life is how it's played out in mine. Maybe looking at these examples will get our brains working along these lines. What does it look like when sin gets you? Let me start off with 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, just to get another framework before us. John says, do not love the world nor the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. If you love the world, what have you done? You've left God. You've left the place of safety. How did you leave God? How did you lose or lapse in your love for God enough to where you love the world more? John says, for all that is in the world, listen, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, the vainglory of life. That's where your life becomes more important and fulfilling the interest that you have in your life more than fulfilling God's will for you. The pride of life, it's not of the Father, but it's of the world. And the world is passing away in the lust of it, but he does the will of God abides forever. What John essentially says here, here's a man in his place with God. That's where we're supposed to be. But a love for the world, an interest in what is outside my place of protection and my godly habitat, my ark of safety with God. I get to peering out there. And what causes that? Well, my lust, my inappropriate desires that are driven by the flesh, the eye, or the pride and vainglory of life. Those things are of the world. God didn't put those things before us. The world has. And guess what? Satan is the god of this world. So he's the source of these things to entice us. And if he's going to do it, he's going to do it through one of these three avenues: the eye, the flesh, or the pride of life. Now let's look at some examples. What does it look like when sin gets you? Why don't we just start with Adam and Eve? God put them in the garden. He put all these trees. He told them to dress and keep the garden. But you can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the midst of the garden, Genesis chapter 3. Now, Eve says to Satan when he comes along and he starts pulling lures out of his tackle box to fish with Eve, he says, what has God said to you? Well, that tree in the garden, we're not to eat of it. We're not to even look at it. You know, you never read where God said don't look at it. It'd be kind of hard to not look at it if you're dressing and keeping it. But something's about to happen. The way Eve looked at that tree is about to change. Satan works that way too. He can change the way and help you, aid you in changing the way you look at things. And he'll appeal to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, or the pride of life. And he does all three with Eve. Because her explanation of what happens after Satan says, God's just, and I'm paraphrasing this, God's just trying to hold you back. Because he knows when you eat of that tree, you're going to be like him. Your eyes will be open. And they were. They were open to look at the world around her much differently than she had formerly looked at it. And she saw that the fruit of that tree was good for food. It was pleasant to the eye. And it was desired to make one wise. That's 1 John 2, 15 through 17 in a nutshell. And that's Satan getting Eve because she didn't get what he was doing. You move on from there to Ahab. King Ahab, we've been talking about him in the past couple of weeks, 1 Kings 21. Or we will be talking about him. Evil, wicked king desired the vineyard of Naboth that was next to his property. And so he goes and he asks, sell it to me. I'll buy it from you. They were not permitted to sell their land. The Israelites weren't. That land was given to them as a right of inheritance. He couldn't sell it. But what did Ahab do? He got upset. He cried and he mourned over it. He became a big old baby because he couldn't get this land that he wanted. And then his wife comes along and she says, you're the king. Just take it. And he began to see differently what might happen. And so, with the help of his wife, a scheme was devised where he could secure that property. Satan lured him to desire in a way that was inappropriate, even to the point of taking a man's life. Is it wrong to be interested or want the property next to your house? No. But Satan can use that desire and turn it into an inappropriate desire. And bring it to the point where your desire meets his enticement and your will is converted, and birthed out of that is death, sin. And so it is the case with Ahab and Naboth. What about David and Uriah? We talk about David and Bathsheba. Well, let's just extend it out, David and Uriah. And think about how Satan worked on David's desires to entice him to change his will into something that would be sinful. And look how far that went in David's life. Not only did it include the adultery, but it grew into deception. It grew into murder for a cover-up. Why? And David, of all people, a man after God's own heart, the Bible says. Well, when you don't get sin, sin will get you. And nobody is exempt from that if they approach it with ignorance. What about Achan? We missed him. We'll back up and get him. Joshua chapter 7, verse 21. In conquering the city of Jericho, don't take any of the spoils. But he did. He saw it. He desired it. He took some of the spoils for himself. You see, here's an opportunity to look at it exactly the way God said look at it. These are spoils of war that are to be dedicated to God. But Achan left God for a moment. And whether lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, or pride of the life, whatever, maybe a combination of all, he was duped into coming out of his place of safety with God, understanding that this was to be dedicated to God, and he desired to dedicate it to himself. And Satan just reeled him out of that place of safety and latched onto him. Adam and Eve, Ahab and Naboth, David and Uriah, Achan, and the goods that he stole from Jericho. What about Simon the sorcerer? Here's a man who's practicing a pagan, sorcery, false religion, and duping people, but he learns the gospel and he obeys it. But then he watches the apostles, how they have this unique ability. They can lay their hands on people and impart miraculous gifts. Now, who in here this morning doesn't think that's pretty neat? I mean, in modern vernacular. I mean, if you had the ability after you converted someone to strengthen them with miraculous ability, who wouldn't want to do that? How many people have been converted to Christ and then stepped back into the world and left the faith? Wouldn't you want to do something to strengthen people? But Achan wanted something more than that. He wanted the gift so that he had the ability to give it. And he tried to buy it with money, as if it were something that could be purchased with money. And he's rebuked strongly for that desire. Why? Because it was an inappropriate desire. It was a sinful desire. How did he get there? Well, he had obeyed the Gospels. He's in a place of safety with God, but Satan says, I have a lure for you. And he throws it out there, and Simon latches onto it. This is what it looks like when sin gets you. Well, we can't leave it there this morning. Certainly, we have to flip this over and ask the question, what does it look like when you get sin? What are some characteristics of people who get it and who are, don't get me wrong, not sinlessly perfect, but in a better place to overcome the temptation, to avoid the enticement so that their desires aren't converted into something that's inappropriate by their own will to the point of sinning? Well, what are some things this morning that help along these lines? I want to give you two examples just by way of mentioning them that you can look at to see people who got it. The first one is Joseph in Genesis chapter 39. When Potiphar's wife cast her eyes on him and tried to seduce him, he got it and he ran. And notice he said, I'll not do this to sin against God. Joseph wasn't willing to leave his place of safety in order to succumb to the enticement. And then David with King Saul. Saul, not a good king, and David, a good man, had multiple opportunities to just take Saul out. 1 Kings chapter 24 is one of those occasions, and David says, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. Is David going to be king? Sure. But not by his own will. Not to the point of expediting that process to take the present king out of the way so that he can be king. He didn't leave his place of safety with God, and so the enticements of Satan weren't able to convert his innocent desire into one that was sinful. Satan couldn't change David's will in this regard. Now, how do we manifest that in our life? What does it look like when we get sin? Here's the first one. Do not live in ignorance. Notice from James chapter 1, verses 13 through 16, the problem was our own desires. That's where the enticement works. It works in our desires. So we can't afford to be ignorant about our own desires, what our weaknesses are, what ways Satan might successfully exploit those desires. We can't do it. James chapter 1 and verse 16 says, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 or 2 and verse 11 says that we are not ignorant of Satan's devices. We can't be ignorant of how he might exploit us. And we can't be ignorant thinking he's not going to, because 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 says, as a roaring lion, he walks about seeking whom he may devour. We're to resist him, Peter says. So number one there, do not live in ignorance. Know your own desires. Number two, stay at home with God. Don't leave God. Back to James chapter 1. Each is drawn away by his own desires. If you and I come to the point where we sin, we had to leave where we were at as faithful Christians in order to do that. You had to leave a place of safety and security to get there. I encourage you to look at Psalm 1, verses 1 through 6, about the godly man versus the wicked. How the godly man stays close to God. He doesn't walk in the way, in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners. He doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in it doth he meditate day and night. He stays close to God. Now, ungodly aren't like that. They leave God, and they enter into the arena of sin. Now, you think about that. When you sin, you left God. Just like the fish that has to leave its place under a submerged log, or that little clownfish on Nemo had to leave the sea anemone. You have to leave. And we do. And he's waiting for us when we do. Stay home with God. Stay tuned into him. Probably most of you young people won't know what I'm talking about right now, but there's this thing in your mom and dad's car called a radio. And it's not just a device that you Bluetooth to play your songs off of your phone. It's got a dial on it. And you have to turn the dial to tune into the station. And all these stations are broadcasting. All of their signals are out there in the air. And you take that radio and you tune into that signal. And the only way to receive that signal is to tune in to it, to turn the dial to that frequency. We do that, brothers and sisters. We turn the dial and tune into the signal of the enticement of the devil that meets our desires, that changes our will, that produces sin. You can't receive the signal if you don't tune into it. So stay at home with God. Don't be drawn away. Don't tune in to what the devil's trying to sell. Next, take ownership of your life. It's not God's fault. There are some very convenient religious ideas in this world. Sin is just a fact of my life. My nature is sinful. My flesh is sinful. Sin is just something I do. No, you got a whole Bible that says, don't do it. And so take ownership of your life. It's not God's fault. We can overcome sin. We can prevent sin in our life, at least the habitual practice of it. I'm not an advocate this morning of the idea that you and I can live a life of perfect sinlessness without ever sinning. But that's not what we're talking about this morning. And we're talking about a mindset and a way of life that when that does happen, we recognize what we've done immediately and we get out of it in a biblical way. Paul said, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself become disqualified. I am responsible for me. You are responsible for you. We have to take ownership of our situation. And then lastly, be honest about your weaknesses. James chapter 1, verse 14, we're drawn away of our own desires. Hebrews 4:15 says, Jesus was tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin. We're tempted in multiple points and ways. We need to be honest about our own weaknesses. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 13, after Jesus' temptation, the Bible says the devil had ended every temptation. He departed him for a more opportune time. He's coming back. You may win one victory, but the devil doesn't turn around and kick the dirt and say, well, I've been defeated. No, he'll be back. He'll come back with a different lure. He might come back with that same one. But what does it look like when you get sin? When you really get it? And you're trying to live a life of avoidance and overcoming. Don't live in ignorance. Stay home with God. Don't tune in to Satan's broadcast. Take ownership of your life and be honest about your weaknesses and try to strengthen those areas in your life. Nobody's perfect. We all mess up. We all commit sin, but that's the exception, not the rule. Some Christians make little effort to grasp sin, to really get it. It's no wonder that sin gets so many Christians. It's so unnecessary when we can get sin so that sin doesn't get us. I hope this morning that I've made you think at least. I've challenged the idea that you can't do anything about it, and hope that I've given you something to think about with regard to getting sin so it doesn't get you. Maybe you're here this morning, you're not a Christian, you've never obeyed the gospel. Sin has you. Satan doesn't need, he just needs to keep you where you're at. But if you get it, if you understand your situation, then you'll do something about it. And you'll obey the gospel through faith, repentance, confession, and baptism in water to have your sins washed away. Become a child of God, a member of the body of Christ, a Christian this morning, one free from sin, armed and equipped with the Bible that will help you get sin so that it doesn't get you any longer. Maybe you have some other need that we can assist you with this morning. We're going to sing a song to encourage, and you have this opportunity to come as we stand and sing.